Hello and welcome to the CherrySTEM. It is us and you and us. I am Anna Cherry, joined by the handsome and talented Richard Rawl, and by all of our lovely viewers. And we're brought to you by, ourselves, as well as the power of the sexiest, the smartest, the most intelligent men whose apartments smell like mahogany, our patrons.
Leather and mahogany.
Their apartments smell like leather and mahogany. Indeed. So if you'd like to become one yourself and immediately have a house makeover.
Yes, immediately. Your house would just instantly smell like mahogany. That's how it
and
works.
leather.
And leather.
Leather smell will start a little later.
Rich mahogany, just so you're...
Definitely. You can go to patreon.com/AnnaCherry. And for Challenger mode is an idea I would suggest for you to check out. For that should unlock all the fun goodies that we do here after the podcast. But also, shield your innocent eyes from porn and stuff. And titties. So if you stay underneath hardcore mode, you should be good. But of course, if you can support us without hardship, do so. Patreon.com/AnnaCherry.
But I mean, if you want the porn, I mean...
You know what to do.
We are fine purveyors.
Indeed. And if you're a regular on this YouTube channel, there are vlogs of photo shoots that we do for the heroic mode. And of course, I do monthly baking for legendary mode, so you get treats sent to your home. So there's that plus nudity. So there's quite a lot going on. But if you can keep it at Challenger mode, that will still give you a variety of resources as well as rewards as our thanks. And if you're not a patron, we definitely appreciate your views, and you can figure out resources and other things for yourself that we look at by checking out patreon.com/AnnaCherry. Nonetheless, follow it and keep up to date with the public uploads of this podcast, which I do every week. So all of these 30-some episodes of CherrySTEM are available on Patreon for free for everyone, for the public, as audio files. And there's a variety of links and stuff in the description of each of those posts.
Is this an audio file or an audio file?
It's both.
Whoa.
If you're an audiophile for audiophiles, that is the place to go. Patreon.com/AnnaCherry. All right, let's get into the news. Oh no, we need our own intro. We need something original. We'll have to come up with.
Let's get fucked into it. Stuck it.
I know, right? Let's jump into sticking into the news.
Just that. Let's just something. I have no idea what this episode's about.
You do. You just forgot.
Okay, what is it about? Tell us.
I promise. I will tell you. I'll tell you. As soon as I have my graphic ready. This is why you have multiple people working on podcasts and not just one person. But it's all right. We're fucking professionals up in here. And we're fucking professional.
Fucking professionals up in here.
Made me realize that we're porn stars doing a CherrySTEM podcast, and we don't really focus on the cherry all that much. So we need to actively intersperse porn news into our science.
We should. That's a good idea.
Just so no, just us being porn people is not enough.
It's not enough.
No. We need porn news as well.
Porn news.
Porn news.
All right. So what's this episode about?
Your mother.
Oh no. What's it about?
All right. So, as you recall, we just talked about this last night. 3 Forms of Meaning.
Oh,
and the Management of Complexity by Jordan B. Peterson, Department of Psychology, University of Toronto, and a bunch of other people. It's a bunch of other people. Is the fact that it's published in The Psychology of Meaning. I don't know what year, but it's a book that I ran into when I was doing a lot of looking into meaning and psychology of such and neuroscience of it, and I ran into this book, but I couldn't really read the book because it was one of those, you gotta buy the book to read the book and things.
For $120, you can have this 30-page book.
I mean, I don't know actually if they were selling an online version or not, but they did have a table of contents, and one of the first chapters was a familiar name.
Yeah, I gotta write an academic book, man. That's not just any book. It's gotta be a motherfucking academic
That's
book.
what this is, and it was, I read like a little excerpt from this, and I think you like it. So I think we're gonna, I don't think this is gonna be CherrySTEM the Pits. I think this would be like
The Pits?
Yeah, the Pits. That was the name of the one-off episode we had where we just trashed the article. Actually, last episode.
Oh, okay.
I think it was the last episode.
That episode was the Pits.
It was, exactly. Well, the content that we were reviewing was the Pits.
It was a fun episode. I enjoyed it.
It really was, yeah. But okay, let's
I don't even know I don't remember what it was, but I know I was ranting about something.
Yeah. You were. So yeah, the 3 forms of meaning and management of complexity, bitches. So,
all right,
yeah.
3 forms of meaning. So, yeah, that's the thing. Is like when you were telling me about it, I was like, well, what do they mean by this?
I might, well, okay. Thankfully, like 24 pages of it, 25 pages are, no, 25. 5 pages out of 23 or something are
references.
So it's an 18-page thing. Don't know if we're gonna get through all that, but I don't know if we can handle 17 pages in 2 hours. But we might try. Yeah, I don't know. It's just we left off talking. The MINDBEND was on. Oh wait, the description is not quite accurate. It's not quite psychology of self. That's what it was last time, but this time it's more like Jordan B. Peterson's 3 forms of meaning. Let's keep it at that. And complexity. And what complexity? Something complexity. Management of complexity. Fuck it. Fuck management. Too many words.
So it sounds like the general idea is talking about like the complexity of our lives, that all the different stuff that we have to kind of get a handle on. Is that what it's talking about?
I don't know.
I'm just guessing here.
I have no idea what we're about to find out.
You haven't read it?
I have no idea.
Absolutely
oh my god. No clue.
Okay.
No, just like the other article, going into it completely
just going
reaction.
into it dry. All right.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm dry, but but yeah, no, I'm not primed.
Okay, unprimed response. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
This is a psychological experiment. You get our unprimed response.
Mm-hmm. The complexity of the world. It's a dramatic reading, also.
It's the dramatic reading of what's his name?
Jordan B. Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. I feel like this was back in the day when he was still like just a University of Psychology professor at Toronto. So
yeah, okay.
I think this is
all right. That's right. Okay. He's a little more of an edgelord. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like this was before the edgelordness. Right. So before the lobsters.
I mean, I still like some of his stuff.
Yes.
I've seen some things. I mean, I've run into some shit that I'm like, okay,
unfairly, we first encountered him when listening about some IQ stuff, and we both disagree with a variety of things to do with that whole thing. Just IQ tests, IQ in general. There's a lot of bullshit there.
Did he, as a psychologist, actually uphold IQ tests? Because that is like, oh my god, what the fuck?
He was talking. He was being interviewed about IQ, and it's like, and yeah, there are. It's like evolutionary psychology.
I mean, up to like 100, between 80 and 110 maybe, or 90 and 110 maybe. It has some application, but beyond that, it's like basically useless.
Right, but I feel like there's validity to the approach of the evolutionary psychology, where it's like some groups of people have on average lower IQ or higher IQ, or otherwise they score collectively different on this particular metric. Regardless of how flawed the metric is, it does represent a difference between people and that is controversial.
Yeah.
And that is
say if people are even slightly different, even if you give caveats that there's trade-offs and things like that, people still want to give you shit.
Right.
Which is
just
fucking ridiculous.
And of course,
that's like a type of insanity that mankind has. Like, we've been circulating the story that everybody's exactly the same, and it completely disagrees with everyday experience. I mean, I don't understand. There really is this weird thing that humans do, where we recycle these stories that are completely and utterly against the obvious, complete, like anybody at all, every single person can see right in front of their face every day, all the time, that it is completely not true. You know, like and actually we end up saying opposite things, like, oh, everybody's unique and different. No, everybody's exactly the same. Everybody's unique and different. Everybody's exactly the same. Well, make up your mind, motherfucker.
Good point.
Those are things like you literally notice when you're a kid, and then everybody jumps on you for daring to say such truths, things.
Right. So we have therefore, like, I feel like because of that nature of IQ tests, there's something could be said on it where you're not like completely off base, and you could be seen as edgy because of that and stuff like that. But he definitely went into embracing a more edgelord side of I guess the internet, and I don't really know much about him personally. His daughter has a radical all meat diet thing that she does. I don't know.
All meat.
I don't know what's going on, but good for them. Let's go back over the article or the excerpt, or I don't even know what to call it. It's not technically an article because it's like actually part of a book, but
so it's a section of a book.
Yeah. This was in the Psychology of Meaning book.
Interesting. So he just included one of his papers. I'll probably be doing that with my book, actually.
I don't know if it's I guess it is a paper.
Yeah, no, it's a paper. It's got all the fucking references. I mean, it's got fucking
it does.
5 pages of references.
Yeah, it's a PDF paper looking like.
I get lazy after I'm like, a page of references is fucking a half a page of references. Well, no, okay, half a page is actually a little too light. But once I get to about a page of references, I'm like, oh, motherfucker, look it up your goddamn self. Figure it the fuck out, Jesus Christ. If you can't find that shit yourself, fuck you.
You got a little aggro on it. All right, so.
I hate commenting code. Actually, commenting code I do automatically. It's actually putting in error handling. I think anybody who's ever been a programmer hates putting in error handling. Okay, sorry, go ahead. It's just that kind of stuff. It's like, oh man, all right, go ahead. Well, I'll shut up now.
Dramatic reading of Jordan B. Peterson's 3 Forms of Meaning and Management of Complexity.
Well,
so
we are broadcasting right now, right?
What?
We are broadcasting. They can hear us, right?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure.
Pretty sure.
Pretty sure.
Did anybody commented? Did anybody say hello?
People said hello.
Okay.
It says live, 19 minutes.
Our voice is coming through. I mean, you don't realize I've been scarred forever by the couple of times that you've made it where they couldn't hear us. So then now it's like forever. I'm gonna always be wondering. It's like, do they hear us? Is it going through?
I mean, the microphone is jumping up and down.
I'm sorry, it's PTSD.
I know, you're right.
I can't handle it anymore. All right, go ahead. I'll be quiet now. I swear. Go ahead.
I could have begun recording it just in case, but I mean, like, microphone is
okay. Microphone's hot. Microphone's live. We're good. We're good. I'm supposedly theoretically.
Says that it's live.
I think it's going through.
Yep. Well, I don't think we're being quiet, but jokes. Chad's got jokes.
Oh.
You said you're gonna be quiet, but if you're gonna be quiet, then they certainly can't hear you. Okay, we got this.
All right, I'll be quiet now.
Will you though?
Will I though? I don't know.
All right, we got this.
Dramatic reading.
The complexity of the world.
The complexity of the world.
I'm gonna bring my Soul
Of
Calibur
the world.
voices up in here.
Most psychological models, even those as sophisticated as Gray's, reference needed, and provided, are based on the assumption that the world is made of objects, is it existing independently and given or more abstractly of stimuli. That assumption is incorrect. See, I think we read this. The boundaries between objects or stimuli are largely situation dependent and objectively determined. Half our brain is devoted to vision. This indicates that we do not simply see what is there. The frame problem, quotes, encountered by AI engineers producing sensory systems for machines provides another indication of perception's complexity. This profound problem, the infinite search space for perceptual representation, looms over all other current psychological concerns. We live in a sea of complexity. The boundaries of the objects we manipulate are not simply given by those objects. Every object or situation can be perceived in an infinite number of ways, and each action, or even event, has an infinite number of potential consequences. Infinite, that's stretching it, I think. But thus, as the robotics engineer Brooks points out, echoing Eysenck, perception is the, quote, essence of intelligence, end quote, and the, quote, heart part of the problem being solved, end quote. The world does not present itself neatly, like rows of tins on a shelf. Nature cannot be easily cut at her joints. We frame our objects by eradicating vast swaths of information, intrinsically part of those objects and categories, but irrelevant to our current objectively defined purposes. How do we manage the miracle of simplification? We will address this question from a neurodevelopmental and evolutionary perspective.
I'm gonna stop you right there, Jordan. Just simplifying as a way to make it where there is no perception. That's like exactly the miracle of simplification. I mean, it just makes it where the simpleton's mindset is like that. That's the best, man. Oversimplify everything. I already dislike the direction he's coming from.
Well, I feel like a lot of it might come from the.
It's both. You have to also be able to not just cut away things, but also match things. There's pattern matching that is really a huge part of it. So,
like 10 years ago or so, though, there was a style or a convention to things that were being produced in the neuroscience field that had this whole the miracle of the brain is so magical, it's the most amazing thing ever, it's the best. So no matter what, like, the brain does, it's like the magic of how it farts, you know, like it's so it could be a convention of that sort, to the point there was actually a book made that we read in Neuroscience seminar class with Garrick where they had I don't know if we still have it upstairs or not, I should check, but it talked about how the brain is actually not, so it was sort of debunking this idea because I think people really tried to push neuroscience really hard, so they were like talking about the miracle of the brain, and then there was this book that came out that we actually read as part of neuroscience seminar that was like, no, the brain's not, no, it's like fucking leaky tubes of information going everywhere, it's like a bunch of noodles, like, well, fuck, no, man, it's a mess. So because they were trying to debunk this aesthetic
just general idea
convention
that everything is this pure and perfect order,
right? So he could be hyperbolizing from the perspective of,
but he's saying it's like
the miracle of simplification.
I really dislike the glorification of simplification, though, because simplification is the biggest problem in society. It's the people oversimplifying things is what causes most of our suffering, is the way in which we fuck everything up is over fucking
but
simplifying.
I think he's talking about like on a neurodevelopmental level of like perception. We're talking about like basics of cognition.
So if this was 10 years old, it has been the past decade that basically everybody in science has begun to understand that complexity is so fucking crucial, and so he may have been it may just be that was year it came out, that was the era that this was published in.
Right. The book is fairly old ish, I think. But yeah, I understand where you're coming from. But I will play devil's advocate for a moment.
I mean, yes, you do have to. There's such a wide variety.
It was published in 2013.
Oh, okay. Then in that case, he's behind. He's behind the times. there's.
Well, I will say in their defense that if I will just wait and see, because if we are talking about the basics of like intro to neuroscience, like we're talking about cognition, like cognitive neuroscience, so like perception, sight, sound, like just like basic shit. Because I mean, as in whenever you get into biology or neuroscience or anything, you need to learn the basics. You need to learn about like cell biology and developmental embryo, whatever biology.
Well, I guess
and,
I'm coming from the perspective of like,
cones.
yes, you do have to pair things off, and you have there
right.
is
So
there
is
there's
a
tremendous
magic
amount of input, and so there
right,
that does have to be. How does that get filtered down?
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
And so, but it's just I don't know. I just really
if we're talking about
I'm like
that,
allergic to any kind of glorification of simplification because that's just like oh god, it's like it's so fucking horrible in so many ways.
Yes. And I do feel that, but we'll see if that's what they're talking about. The nature of reality. The nature of the reality of things consists in their persistent forcing themselves upon our recognition. If a thing has no such persistence, it is a mere dream. Reality then is persistence is regularity, and that's a quote by C.S. Pierce.
Oh my god, you pulled the.
Again? I already
it out.
found it downstairs once. What the shit?
So what we're laughing about is our cat. Has the little ball that goes around in the circle. He ripped the ball out and knocked it down the stairs just now. That's what that loud clacking sound is. And
that
he's
ball that I found underneath your table downstairs because he was just fucking with something underneath there, and I was like, "What are you doing?"
How did he get it out? Those things are really hard to get. He must have just like.
I mean,
really went after it to pull it the fuck out.
It's not that hard to put it back in, so I don't know how hard it is.
I know, but he's a tiny little kitty. I mean, pulling those things out. I mean, it's not easy to get that ball out of that track.
He loves that ball.
It's difficult. He must have just been beasting it, like reaching up in there, full body, like get this motherfucker out.
Well, now he learned how to do it because that's the second time he did it.
Little
in
shit.
24 hours.
He's like, yeah, you think you just gotta get some run around in that track? No, no, motherfucker.
You're coming with me. Oh, kittens.
All right.
So, yeah.
What?
Another quote. The affordances of the environment are what it offers the animal, what it provides or furnishes, either for good or ill. J.J. Gibson. And nothing exists except atoms and empty space. Everything else is opinion. Diogenes Laertius. I don't know.
Diogenes.
I don't know where we got all these weird quotes, but cool. Thanks, Kitty.
He's just gonna knock that fucking ball. I think he was literally carrying it in his mouth. I don't know how he could carry that huge thing in his mouth, but I think he carried it down the stairs.
The size of a ping pong ball, except much heavier.
And harder.
And it's his best friend now.
Yeah, he's okay. So just so you know what that noise is, that's the cat.
It's him banging plastic ball into the metal table that houses the microphone, because that's smart. Thanks, kid. Thanks, kid. The objects and categories we use are neither things nor labels for things.
What?
What? Instead, objects are entities bounded by their affective relationship to a goal. We perceive meaningful phenomena, not the objective world.
So what he's saying is that, yeah, we're gonna have to take that away from him. He's losing his shit. What he's saying is that that we separate things based upon their usefulness to us. He's just saying it in kind of a shitty way.
Yes. No, I don't like it.
Yeah, I know, me either. I think a lot of times academic papers, they spend a tremendous amount of time sounding academic instead of explaining themselves.
Yeah, that's a prerequisite to being published. If
you have to
read.
Right. It has to be unnecessarily, complex. It has to be unnecessarily complex, which is also.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Okay. It's so fucking difficult to understand them. Okay. The non-institutions, intuitions. That's tiny font. Let me just see if I can make it bigger. Is that a plus? Hell yeah, it is. That's so much better.
Objects have certain properties at the basic level category system we are biologically prepared to use. They are solid, opaque, massive, and reasonably permanent. Features that become salient because of their consequences for action. Okay, sure, that makes sense. Solid objects can be gripped and manipulated. Density and solidity thus seem more real than experiences such as color. Our embodied basic level intuitions also lead us to understand the constituent elements of the objects we manipulate as bits of matter, increasingly smaller but similar in kind. Similar to what?
To each other.
J.J. Gibson, addressing such issues, defined the, quote, ambient optic array at a point of observation, end quote, as the central concept of ecological optics. This array is a heterogeneous,
Yeah.
differentiated arrangement. Such an array necessarily surrounds the point of observation in ecological space. Quote, the structure of an optic array, so conceived, is without gaps, completely filled. Every component is found to consist of smaller components. Within the boundaries of any form, however small, there are always other forms, end quote. His observations prove very useful.
What the fuck is he talking about? I have a harder time understanding things when they're spoken than when I read them myself.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, actually.
Do it.
Yeah. Here, let me switch up with me. Let me have a seat here, because yeah, I can. Otherwise, I'm not going to understand it very well if I'm not reading it.
Okay. I will use something else to monitor the show.
All right. So where are you at right here?
J.J. Gibson. So these are the 3 quotes that I read. The fancy. Well,
Okay.
we just won't worry about showing people the text to read along with us, or should we do that? Because if we do that, that'll be a pain.
It's fine.
Okay.
Allowing people to read along with us is probably because I'm wanting to read it.
Oh.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So object and categories we use in either.
Oh, don't do that.
Yeah. Okay.
No, don't do that.
That's
I can't
just you.
follow that.
I know. No,
No,
I'm catching
it's
up
fine.
myself. It's fine.
Don't do that.
Don't worry. It's fine. No, that's just you. You. That's your spur. Not everybody's spur.
But I can't follow it.
It's okay. It's fine. I was just catching up. I was behind.
Okay. Sorry, I can't follow.
Yeah, I know. That's your spur. Not everybody's. Yeah, I know. I know.
So
It's
you
okay.
have to make sure I
It's
can
alright.
follow.
It's fine.
Okay. Actually, you don't have to make sure I can follow, because I can ask you for a teal deer. It'll be fine.
All right. So this is where you just read. Hear this J.J. Gibson shit.
I'm pretty sure, because those are the quotes up there that I read at the beginning.
Okay.
At the top
Talking
of the
about
hill.
objects being solid, opaque, massive, and reasonably permanent. Features that become salient. I'm just backing up a little bit to give a context of what the fuck he's trying to say.
What the fuck is he trying to say?
Density and solidity feel more real than experiences such as color. Okay, so the important part here is that physical objects are a type of experience that are different from just visual experience. Bits of matter increasingly smaller but similar in kind. So he's differentiating like visual versus physical.
Okay.
J.J. Gibson, addressing such issues, defined the ambient optic array at a point of observation as the central concept of ecological optics. What the fuck is ecological optics? This array is a heterogeneous, differentiated arrangement. The fuck does that mean?
No idea.
Different. Okay, so it's an arrangement. I think what he's trying to explain is that if you freeze time at any point in a room, there is light coming towards any point. And that light is an array of all the information of the room. So in other words, like if you freeze this room right now, I can move to any point in the room here, and there will be an image of the entire room present at that point because the light is going to all the different points in the room. And so I think that's what they're talking about with this optic array. Maybe let's see. Array is heterogeneous differentiated arrangement. Such an array necessarily surrounds the point of observation in ecological space. Why the fuck is it ecological? What the fuck does that have to do? Whatever. The structure of an optic array, so conceived, is without gaps, completely filled. Every component is found to consist of smaller components. Within the boundaries of any form, however small, there are always other forms.
Come here.
Okay, that is so. This is so fucking vague.
Here, I got you. Let's switch back. Here.
What are you talking about? What? Why am I? Oh, you want me to read over there? Okay, sure.
That way I can.
That way you can
do all
sit
the
back in your
fancy-
chair. All right.
No, that way I can actually switch between text and our faces and have the dynamic stream podcast.
Gotcha. It's good. It's fine. Great.
All right.
Because see, these are faces talking about it, but then I have to go back and show people the text, and so
Okay,
I'll just keep
sure.
switching between the two.
His observations proved very useful. I don't know how the fuck they prove useful when they're that fucking vague.
Well, what is he even saying?
Forging
Hold
a
on.
deep understanding of the potential
Wait,
in
wait.
the real.
Is this basically another way of saying that, like, let's read it again, huh? The structure of an optic array so conceived is, let's assume he means the field of vision. So conceived is without gaps, completely filled. Every component is found to consist of smaller components. Within the boundaries of any form, however small, there are always smaller forms. So, are we essentially talking about the fact that in the field of vision, there's always filled space. Like there's always, literally, always, constantly something constantly there. Like no matter, this is more than just the fractal universe, but just like looking anywhere you look, there's infinitely more stuff to look at. No matter how much you like, no, in the field of vision, there's always something there. Is that what we're talking about? Because if that's what I mean, because that would talk about max complexity, you know? So,
yeah, I suppose.
So after that, he goes. His observations proved very useful for forging a deep understanding of the potential in the real. I don't know what that means. That sounds like psychobabble or whatever.
Yeah.
Gibson
So I think he's talking about. So okay, so if you're trying to, I mean, what we're trying to look at here is all perception from an animal perspective, from a human perspective, from just perceiving reality.
Like cognitive.
And so what is fucking
like
reality
literally
at all?
perceiving.
What is an information system that has information coming into it, attempting to get a hold on it,
which
and so that's
is
fine.
very relevant for AI because essentially
Right.
we're talking about, because when we look at cognition and neuroscience of the cognitive psychology and all of that, we're basically trying to figure out how do we sense reality and draw conclusions from it, therefore AI. Like it always goes to that.
So how do you create an intelligence? What are the parts of it? And so there are certain things that he's going to have to refer to. And I think that ecological optics is just, I mean, I think he's just talking about the development of perceiving light. Let's see.
Gibson also pointed out that the array is segregated perceptually into a perspective structure, changing with every displacement of the point of observation, and an invariant structure common to multiple points of observation. I think we're just talking about the finer points of like vision.
Yeah, I think that's what he's getting into. And neuroscience.
This is page 3.
Well, vision really is an important part of neuroscience, and it's very closely related to the development of AI because some of the first AI.
How do you perceive?
Is visual perception, like for driving, like the focus of a lot of the first autonomous, things. Are actually autonomous vehicles. There's all these different
self-driving AI
autonomous
is the only AI we have.
And so visual perception, which they use either laser arrays or a variety of things like that, kind of started in that.
Is that where the word array is coming from and why it's cropped up in here?
Yeah, I guess. And the other thing that is very interesting about the visual cortex is literally a fucking grid.
Right.
I mean, it's one of the only places in the brain where we can just really directly say there is a 1-for-1 correlation between the activation of this neuron and this fucking optical nerve. It's like even then you can just see that that the grid senses lines. Okay, there's a line on the grid is a line in fucking reality. I mean, you can put a 1-to-1 activation between reality and the shit happening in the fucking brain. So,
so when he says that, Gibson also pointed out that the array is segregated perceptually into a perspective structure, changing with every displacement of the point of observation, and an invariant structure common to multiple points of observation. What?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense because the invariant structure is your own model of reality. He's just included your own sensory model, where you're actually compositing.
Because if we're talking about a perspective structure changing with every,
there is no fucking invariant. That's bullshit.
Right, and so
that's bullshit.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, you can continue reading if you want.
Yeah, there's the invariant is stored in your data locally. That's not coming into you. All right.
Yeah, because you can't be in multiple points of observation at once. So I don't.
Right. So I think he's trying to set up that there is a reality that can be agreed upon, and that's why he's bringing that up. It's just a bad point to bring it up.
I mean, if that's what Gibson, like, he's just being very pedantic about what Gibson
Yeah,
did.
I guess. Perhaps.
Gibson pointed out.
Democritus, who formulated an ancient atomic theory, noted that the void in which atoms were distributed was just as real as the atoms themselves. This seemingly self-evident observation has many interesting consequences. So basically, that space itself is something that exists. Atoms can differ in arrangement given space. This allows for both randomness and ordered pattern or array. Something random cannot be fully represented except by something as complex as the random elements themselves. Ordered arrays, by contrast, where some elements repeat, can be represented by using elements within the pattern to stand for the whole. So what they're saying is that what it's saying is that if there are
it's really difficult.
There's a difference between random and repeating. In other words, like if you like, okay, so your eyes have a refresh rate, so therefore you're getting images over and over.
Just back to the eye thing though, like just really quickly, I wanted to tie neuroscience in with like biology and psychology, because like cognition straddles all three of those. Neuroscience being actually both psychology and biology, but no, we're talking about not actually edge detection specifically, which is a comment from chat from patrons. But no, we're talking about the fact that the eye is a grid that senses 360, because like the eyeball is in itself a grid that senses 360 degrees of light coming into it, and there is a representation.
Well, it doesn't, not 360 degrees, but
however much, however many degrees, 180, right. I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably not in that.
And there's a similar. Well, I was just thinking about like the surface circle.
Yeah, the internal surface of the eye is
right.
It's not represented 360. No, it's like it's not 180. It's like maybe 120 degrees is the maximum number of. I'm just guessing here.
But when they were teaching us, they were saying something about how it's like a circle. Anyway, in the biology,
it's a semicircle.
In the biology of it all, every bit of your front of your eye that has the rods and cones that sense the light, it has a column of cells in the brain structure that represents
in the visual cortex,
yeah, that represents, which is at the bottom of the base of your skull back there. That represents a variety of very specific physical objects that you're looking at. So there would be like a column that will light up to where you see a vertical line. There's another one that lights up where you see a horizontal line. So they're very one-to-one specific,
yes.
Where
columns. You're seeing where there's rods, the rods are being activated in a line, and ends up being neurons activated literally in a physical line in your brain. The neurons themselves are actually set up as a grid, and they are physically in that shape. Whereas most of the any of the other data in the brain is stored in a much more abstract fashion. Whereas this is like basically the most ones and zeros part of the brain is the visual cortex.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, yes. So why was that important to the what we're talking about?
Well,
here?
because we're talking about it right now too with the complexity of, if we're talking about like visual.
Okay, so repeating versus
vision and like the complexity
persistent
of it,
elements versus random elements. So
right.
Okay.
Because I don't quite understand what.
So something random cannot be fully represented except by something as complex as the random elements themselves, is one of the statements he makes.
Right.
Which first off, the idea of random itself is a human perception of complexity, and that's
anyone who works with computers or AI will know that there's
he's but then again, like I said, this paper itself could have been published like more than a decade ago.
True, it was happened to be included in a 2013 publication.
Yeah, because this is kind of behind.
He quotes a whole lot of 80s and 90s references, so I don't know.
Ordered arrays, by contrast, where some elements repeat, can be represented by using elements within the pattern to stand for the whole. So what he's saying is that a line can go off indefinitely, but you can represent a line with a little short piece of a line.
Right.
In other words, because it repeats, you can create abstractions, and
yes.
So it is what he's trying to point out is the nature of repetition allows for abstraction. And allows for this symbolic representation. So that is important when you're talking about meaning. That is an important thing he's bringing out here. So that's the first time so far I've seen he's actually hit upon a point that matters. All right, so
A square composed.
Great. Okay, a square composed of an equally spaced 4x4 array of dots, thus one line of 4 dots repeated 4 times. Representation of the whole by the part akin to Miller's 1956 chunking
Yeah, I just ignored
massively
the date.
decreases computational complexity. Yes, that's true. Okay, now, modern space is more complex than that of Democritus. It is space-time with 4 dimensions,
Yeah.
height, whatever, height, length, width, and time. This means
Well,
it
I
can,
mean, that's true.
yeah, well,
The time
kind
is
of.
a metric of
I'm
change.
sure he doesn't actually know how space-time is conjoined, and most people who talk about space-time have no fucking clue what that means.
Time is a measurement.
Yes,
It is true.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a fourth kind of
The
measurement.
vast majority of people who are not specialists in physics
I
have no
will
fucking
agree
clue
with
what
that.
space-time actually means, and the conjoinment of the two. So they just get that time is a fourth dimension, which makes sense to and they think of it in the classical way. The pre-1905 way is the way that most people think of time as a fourth dimension.
You're right, that it is just a measurement.
Before they think of it in the way that existed before 1907, excuse me, because it was actually Minkowski. So anyway,
I still want
this-
to let you loose on that topic at some point.
Yes.
CherrySTEM.
So this means that constituent elements of things are arranged in quantized 4-dimensional array of varying heterogeneity.
What the fuck's quantized mean?
It's in bits that are
I hear
separate,
it said so often.
quantized.
What
And
the fuck does it mean?
like, okay, so anytime that something can be separated into its smallest constituent parts, it is quantized. Okay. Intelligible arrays have been identified at many levels of resolution, from that of the quark, 1/10,000th squared, as large as an atom, to the supragalactic, 10 to the 25 meters. All things in themselves exist simultaneously at those levels and partake in multiple arrays at each level.
Wait, what? That sounds like your hippie aunt who believes in crystal healing,
No,
sentence. Can you?
what they're saying is that
All things in themselves exist simultaneously at all those levels and partake in multiple arrays at each level. What the fuck are you talking about?
he's just saying that that the smallest thing is also there whenever you consider the largest thing.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's true.
All things in
Dan, that
themselves.
hippie aunt is onto something.
All right, a perceptible object is thus an array segregated arbitrarily and for subjective, purposeful reasons from its participation in endless other arrays. So what he's saying is that at the largest level or the smallest level, the smallest fucking
Everything
thing is there,
everything.
and so you have to be able to differentiate and pick a scale at which you're examining things.
Right.
Like when you're looking at a galaxy, you're not thinking about the atoms, you're thinking about fucking stars. You're thinking
Think about fucking stars?
yeah, fucking, I know that's what I'm doing. Okay, so anyways.
That is what you're doing. You are
Yes.
fucking stars.
It's true. All right, so a perceptible object is thus an array segregated arbitrarily and for subjective and
Right.
purposeful reasons from participation in endless other arrays. So the point is that when you start thinking about a bunch of stars,
Right.
you're not thinking about the atoms. And
Right.
the same thing, and so you're not thinking about all of them simultaneously, and so you think of a star as a
Pick
one thing. You say there's
preferred
one star.
frame of
Right. You say there's one star, but is one really an accurate representation of what a star is?
No.
Fuck no. There's
millions.
billions, trillions. There's lots of different ways you can say what a star is, depending on what your scale is. And so that's what he's trying to bring out here. Is it's a problem of scale.
Right.
Whenever you're talking about perception, because the whole context of this is separating things out.
Right,
and,
right.
So that's
Yeah,
why.
separating complexity out and
Right.
simplifying it.
However, some aspect of the original array must be retained. Otherwise, the object cannot be said to truly exist and must be regarded as fantasy. Okay. I guess. Those aspects of the space-time array we perceive as objects tend to be homogeneous at some resolution level in some structural aspect against a comparatively heterogeneous background. To persist for a biologically relevant length of time, and 3, to serve as affordances or obstacles in relationship to a goal. So he's trying to delineate reality in some way for us to talk about. So all of reality, let's delineate it in some way and say that these are some of the aspects of reality. And that's what he's talking about here.
To be
One, they have to be, for us to
basically be all the same everywhere.
Right.
In a
To be
recognizable
homogeneous
way.
at some resolution level and some structural aspect against a comparatively heterogeneous background.
So to not just be like all crazy every other day, just
Right.
sort of be the same all the time.
Yep.
To persist for
Biologically relevant.
That's hilarious. Something about being put in those terms. Persist for a biologically relevant length of time.
Right.
Yes, I would say that's a requirement, indeed.
Yes.
I would
And to
say.
serve as affordances or obstacles in relationship to a goal. So what he's talking about here is that we have the whole reason why we separate things is for a goal. The reason I'm talking about stars, why I say stars, why I say there's one star, is because
It's a little odd thinking about things in that perspective. It's a little like Dawkins' selfish gene, a little, where it's like.
no, but that's true. It's
He's
he's right about this.
Yeah,
that you
because
have,
on a perceptual level, that is a machine that is trying to figure out, like, to determine where it's at,
There is
what's
a
going
goal.
on, how to behave.
right, and so there's
Goals to
and so
accomplish,
there,
yes.
it's valuable for a goal, and that goal is to, for me, I'm talking about galaxies, so therefore I have
Right.
to, so there is a
In
goal.
each circumstance, there's a goal that determines our scale or whatever else.
Right. It's just like you can't say something is good without saying, well, for what?
Yeah.
And it's like something is valuable for what? There always has to be a goal. So anyhow, so knowledge of these facts help us understand, one, how the object can have a subjective property as an affordance, for example. I have no idea what he means by an affordance. Two, why the object is less than the thing in itself. Oh God, that's a thing in itself is that's a
the postmodernist
keyword.
thing.
Yeah. Okay, and three, how the object can still be empirically real. Okay.
No,
How the object can have a subjective property. So what they're talking about is, how is it that an object, okay, so I say there's two clouds, you could say there's one cloud because of the fact that, what's really the difference between one cloud and a second cloud, except for some strange borderline of, how many droplets per cubic inch in the air, because if they're close enough together, saying it's one cloud versus two clouds is completely subjective. It's a judgment call. It's based on scale. It's based on something that you put a stake in the ground just arbitrarily. And so there is a subjectiveness to reality that is that you can quantify.
The
you
arbitrary
can say
border conditions that
there are there are things that we put arbitrary borders on because it is
some
useful.
borders are more arbitrary than others.
Yes, absolutely. Some are much more obvious, but still there is a things. This is made of atoms. This is made of atoms. Saying that they are different is not necessarily valuable unless you set up a goal of what it is that you're trying to do, what you're trying to say, what you're trying to accomplish. All right. All right. So that is how the object can have subjective property. 2, why the object is less than the thing in itself. I've forgotten exactly what a thing in itself even fucking means. And 3, how the object can still be empirically real. Can you Google thing in itself real quick?
I could, but my keyboard's really loud.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
I can read them.
Okay, you go ahead and read. I'm gonna. Because thing itself is its own fucking keyword.
The perceived object is simpler than the thing in itself. A prerequisite to comprehension, in parentheses. Does that help? The perceived object is simpler than the thing in itself, while remaining importantly related to the actual thing. Oh no. Oh,
it's Kantian shit.
I can't.
Yeah.
My brain hurts. So, the thing in itself is a prerequisite to comprehension.
Okay, so yes, so this is thing in itself is part of Immanuel Kant's philosophy, and it's I can't. It's just that it actually would be objects as they are, independent of observation. And so it's, in other words, that
objective reality of things, or
it is it's the idea of an objective reality, which I can see how people would have some problem with it.
Okay.
I mean, theoretically, you should, if you believe that atoms are not made up of space-time, which I do, but if you believe that they're not, then you could believe that they are things in and of themselves, but then you would have a problem with the Copenhagen interpretation. So this does end up getting down to physics, because theoretically, according to the Copenhagen interpretation, there has to be some sort of observation, though.
Before a thing exists.
Right, before it really.
Oh, interesting. This Peterson's saying that a thing has to exist before we observe it.
Is he?
Yeah, because the the perceived object is simpler than the thing in itself, a prerequisite to comprehension. So the thing in itself, the objective existence of it is a prerequisite to comprehension, and then the comprehension has to be simpler. That's one of the requirements. The comprehension of it is simpler than the actual thing itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So.
While remaining importantly related to the actual thing. This relationship is the encoding of some genuinely.
Okay, but no, I think we're saying an object. An object is a concept inside your brain, though. I think an object can have a subjective property. In other words, so the object is not the thing outside of you, but the thing as you have put borders around it in your own brain. And then to serve as affordances or obstacles in relationship to goal. So wait a minute. Well, that's no, that's the wrong place. How the knowledge of these facts helps us understand how the object can have a subjective property, why the object is less than the thing itself. Okay, so the object being our perception of it, and how the object can still be empirically real. So yeah, and this is why you end up getting into quantum physics so much whenever you're talking about knowledge, understanding, AI. You have to get down to that level. You have to ask whether or not the Copenhagen interpretation is the right one. You can't talk about development of AI without asking whether or not Copenhagen interpretation is the correct one. That's why I'm constantly fucking talking about it. And so it comes down to, and then a lot of people they're taught Copenhagen interpretation is actually the decoherence theory. That's completely that's newer. That's Zurich. And decoherence is where basically the idea that interaction with things that aren't necessarily like this idea of a spiritual kind of mind or whatever the fuck that can observe. That actually was the first version of Copenhagen, was really about the idea of mind existing before matter, and minds had to be able to, only a mind could observe, and so that, therefore something could only become real in the presence of a mind. And that's actually where fucking Copenhagen really started. That's where Bohr and all of them, that's why there was a lot of Hindu philosophy and things like that wrapped up in
why are Christians more on top of this shit?
They just didn't know.
Because that sounds like exactly what
no, they did. They would have fought it like crazy if they had any knowledge. If they had any knowledge of how much it's Hindu religion.
I mean just like, but is that also Christian though, where it's like at first it was the God word?
No, then God would be the universal observer, and that's actually a lot of the Christian people who that's they're more on the take that there is this universal observer, which is God. So. Anyway, so the point is that there's an observer required for existence, and in the original Copenhagen, and now people are they're regurgitating decoherence theory as though it is Copenhagen, and it's really kind of a child of Copenhagen, but it's still kind of within that whole observance is required sort of fucking thing, and
that really.
The point is that whenever you're talking about whether or not a thing actually is,
which ones,
right? Does it happen first, or is your observation of it? Is it real? That's that question.
Because if we're going to be talking about perception, then that question is at the core of it.
Right. So that's why he's talking about the thing in itself.
I never thought about it that way.
The Kantian philosophy, the thing in itself, and all that. That's where all that shit comes from. That's why there's
it's really fascinating that there's that overlap. I hadn't realized that there was
it's like a question is a thing in itself, does it exist without being observed? Right. Well, whenever you're talking about an object, your idea that object is separate is convenient for you.
Reality is existing outside of your perception, which is like taboo for
right that's taboo for most of academia, that reality is kind of outside, that it's really actually outside of your perception. It's sort of that's kind of taboo a bit for most of academia that swallowed Copenhagen whole. Right. They totally bought into Copenhagen, and many worlds was actually a little bit of a bastard stepchild, and oh my god, don't you dare talk about fucking Pilot Wave, you bastard, you piece of shit, fucking go die. No, seriously, that was you weren't allowed to fucking talk about Pilot Wave and de Broglie theory at all until I've been just hammering away at look at fucking Bush's work. Look at fucking Bush's work. Look at the Coudet experiments. Fucking look, you assholes. Look at this. And now finally people are like, oh, well, maybe Pilot Wave, we should think about it a little bit. But no, it's definitely not right. I mean, we got to accept that Copenhagen's definitely we've known for years that Copenhagen's the right one. But we'll look at it. Look, Pilot Wave. Yeah, okay. Anyway. So yeah, I'm mad, bro.
Essentially, you need to talk. You
can't talk about. Yes, you cannot really talk about the perception of reality by an artificial system until you've kind of gotten down to these bottom levels, which is what he's trying to do in this paper. And I understand the reason why he's going there, because this is what's necessary. If you're going to design a system that is capable of actual understanding, in other words, how do you produce not just knowledge, which all computers prior to AI have? They have knowledge stored in them. But how do you create understanding? And that's what this paper is about. And that has to get down to all these various things of, are certain things subjective? Yes, absolutely. Our perception of objects is useful to us because at a large enough scale, like you think of a piece of paper as one object, but the truth of the matter is there's all these fibers that are all just kind of bound together. And a creature that is tiny, like a mite, would think of a piece of paper as made up of many objects, and and the perception of it as one single object just really wouldn't make any fucking sense at that scale. Just like say there was a creature that was much larger than planets. Thinking of human beings or trees or anything like that as fucking objects is just stupid. They're not separate objects. There's just planets and stars, and right. It's just it'd be asinine to think of trees and humans and things as separate objects. They're all part of the planet, obviously. They're such a tiny, I mean, even our atmosphere is this thin, tiny film on top of this huge ball. Thinking of the atmosphere as something, separate is practically, an irrelevancy. So the point is that your perception of objects is based upon your subjective reality, which has to do with your position in reality. Your scale is a very big part of it, and how big you are is a huge part of it. And he's kind of brought some of that out. So far, those are some things that I do have to commend that are good in this paper. All right. How it can be, the object can still be empirically real is his third thing. So I like that. Why the thing is less than the thing in itself, and 3, how the object can still be empirically real. So in other words, there is the object which we perceive, which is putting borders around it that are useful to us, and then there is the empirical thing that exists outside of that, borders that we place on it and our perception of it and all that. And so that's what he's talking about as empirically real outside of ourselves. So he is talking about our reality existing outside of ourselves and outside of all the little borders and subjective things that we put on that reality. Let's see. The perceived object is simpler than the thing itself, a prerequisite to comprehension, while remaining importantly related to the actual thing.
Sure.
This relationship is the encoding of some genuine regularity across some dimensions. Yeah. So what he's saying is that there's when I'm talking about 2 clouds versus 1 cloud, well, we have this general borderline that is an average. Where the density of droplets in the air start to fall off. There is a general regularity to that borderline that we perceive of a cloud, and so it's that's what he's talking about. Well, remaining importantly related to the actual thing, this relationship is the encoding of some genuine regularity across some dimensions. So at some scales, so long as you don't zoom in on a cloud and it becomes just fog and droplets hanging in the air of a certain density, as long as you're zoomed out far enough and you look at clouds, there should be some way that you can say without that's 2 clouds, not just 1 cloud. And that's what he's talking about. And the perceived object is thus a low resolution image of the thing in itself. So what he's saying is the thing in itself, Kant's idea of something existing outside of perception, is still there. Both the two clouds and the one cloud are both the thing in itself. The thing in itself being something outside of us.
Right.
Objective reality, which is without our arbitrary borderlines that are part of our subjective perception of objects. The concept in turn is an abstracted simplification of the perceived object, but retains some, not entirely subjective, relationship to that object. Love it. Great. Well done. The constituent elements of an object, the object itself, and the many objects and situations of which the object itself is a constituent element are all equally real.
I mean, sure. I suppose.
Well, I was saying the object itself. I think if you talk about the arrangement of things that make an object that we then say is one single object, is equally sure. I'll buy into that with some caveat. All of this extraneous reality must be stripped away before a given object can be perceived, much less put to use by applying a pragmatic framework of reference to the object, specifying its relationship to a goal. Okay, so all of that stuff we've been talking about, going over, like all that complexity,
right.
You can't fucking deal with that when you're trying to, like, say you're a rabbit running away from a wolf. You can't,
right.
you're not thinking about all that bullshit. All that has to.
What is my relationship to the object in space? What is that object based on my?
Imagine
if you were to like consciously.
There were creatures that did that. They're dead now. Okay.
Can you imagine just seeing this bunny rabbit with all these equations? We now have to make that gift.
We do. The rabbit thinking about that. It's like, what is the thing in itself versus my perception of it?
Yes.
And the wolf's like, I love these rabbits. All right.
The loss of rabbits.
All right. All of this extraneous reality must be stripped away before a given object can be perceived, much less put to use by applying a pragmatic framework of reference to the object, specifying its relationship to a goal, like fucking surviving.
Yeah.
Perception simplifies the world without sacrificing functional grip. The perceiver learns what resolution level is relevant to a given operation by interacting pragmatically with the patterns amenable to perception. The pattern that manifests itself at the appropriate level is granted object status. So we give it, as we say, this is a fucking object because it's useful to me.
Right.
In every act of perception, therefore, entropy at some levels of resolution is reduced to a minimum. That's a weird, that's a bad use of the word entropy, but we'll just say he's talking about removing some chaos, and that is completely bad use of the word entropy. Reduced to, while at others it is allowed to approach the infinite. Thus, the complexity characterizing the thing itself can be successfully, if temporarily, dealt with.
So, okay, basically, that's the, okay, everybody go home. There's his thesis, is that complexity is dealt with by choosing a resolution level and then deciding that that's the level we're going to stick with, and then everything else can, like, just fuck off.
Yeah, basically.
Basically.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
It's like, this is what's fucking useful to me. That's a fucking object, and the rest of this bullshit can go fuck itself because I don't need it.
Yeah.
All right. So then, when we do not see much of what is there. Simons and Rensink.
Yeah, I just ignored those.
Okay. The fact that each object pattern is involved in many invisible arrays means that things have many invisible properties. This is a good thing when new problems emerge. Old objects can be investigated
for new properties.
For new properties. However, it is also a bad thing. Since each object pattern is involved in many arrays, we can perceive it incorrectly. Yeah, you can basically perceive something as spread across, various things, and that's not useful. What he means by perceiving incorrectly is once again, perception here is relevant to use, and so it's important that to understand what he's saying there is perceiving something incorrectly is putting things together in a way that is not useful to your application. That's what he means by perceive incorrectly. Therefore, furthermore, the outcome of a hypothetically finite act cannot be definitively calculated.
Oh, okay.
This means simplified knowledge, constant blindness, and endless opportunity for error. What we fail to see can manifest itself unexpectedly, forcing us to attend to objects of perception that appear utterly, even traumatically new, though they may have been lurking in the background forever. So he's talking about...
in that casting away of all the other bullshit, it can go fuck itself. Sometimes
you think it can go fuck itself, and then suddenly
it fucks you.
Yeah, suddenly it's just like what I was talking about yesterday. It's like it is. There's truth within limits, and there's and I'm gonna keep telling this story until people start passing it around and I hear it back, come back to me. And that is there is a tribe in Papua New Guinea who has the fishing tree. The spirit of the fishing tree grants them fish. All they have to do is do the sacred rites and say the prayer, and the fish rise to the surface. This is a replicable event. So therefore, it is semi-scientific. It is proto-scientific in the fact that when they go and do their ceremony, that calls upon the spirit of the fishing tree, anybody can observe that the fish do rise to the surface in the little ponds.
And anyone can do the ceremony.
And anyone can do the ceremony, and it'll happen. And so it's replicable scientific knowledge that the spirit of the fishing tree does indeed bring them fish. And what I mean by this is that it is a truth within limits, and that is that it is actually a neurotoxin in a root, and part of the ritual is beating the root into the water, and then that distributes the neurotoxin that is not toxic to humans, only to the fish, and so therefore that is the way by which it occurs. Now that is relevant to what he's saying there, is that there is this reality underlying things, and we perceive of things. It is not necessary for them to know about the idea of neurotoxins, that because it is useful to these tribal people to only simply know that something about the tree and what they do, in relationship to the tree can bring them fish. And so their abstractions of objects and the spirit of the fishing tree going and getting them fish could be said to be an abstraction of the neurotoxin, without them really knowing that neurotoxin is something that can be quantified. And there are other levels that beyond that, what a neurotoxin is. I now have that same sort of abstraction of what a neurotoxin is, and at our level that we're now talking, there is this sort of borderline around the thing that we're talking about. So the point here is just that there is truth within limits, and that's kind of relevant to what he's saying here. All right. The world, therefore, it's the things lurking in the background that can sometimes traumatically come to view. That's what I wanted to get to, I guess, is that there are things about reality that we know right now and we can test, and are scientific truth, that are only truth within limits, and that we will discover more information about what we theoretically know. And we always have this perception, whenever we know something that is this truth within limits and it's testable and replicable, we think we know everything about that thing. And that is a false perception that humans constantly have. We always think it's the end of science. We always think we've found the God particle. Over and over and over, people, since the beginning of the idea of science, people have been pronouncing the end of science, that we've done it. We've got it all buttoned up. We understand. That is a religious sort of thing, where, when we were first making our various religions, we got all of reality figured out. God did it. There you go. Boom, bing, bang, boom, we got it. And so you ain't got to worry about it anymore. You can simplify things. We got all that shit figured out. And we keep traumatically having these, oh, there's more to it than that. Oh, there's more to it than that. Oh. So the meaning of meaning is the next section here. And so we'll go ahead and start with that. The world therefore manifests itself to us, as religious thinkers and philosophers alike have insisted, in the form of meaning. Such meaning, however, does not take a single form. Instead, it makes itself known in three different classes. The first class includes the most basic, universal, and evolved forms of functional simplifications. This class, meanings of the known, familiar, or determinate world, includes the meanings of individual and social identity that simplify and structure the world. Okay, I think what he's talking about is there's knowledge passed down to us that is the way that things are classified that we automatically kind of assume and use because that's how we were. That's the groping. That's our preloaded software that we are given growing up. The second class includes those that arise to challenge the integrity of our current known or determinate worlds. This class, meanings of the unknown, foreign, or indeterminate world, include the meanings of anomaly or novelty, the explored world, the unexplored world. So there's all this information about things that we already theoretically know that are unexplored. That's the second class he's saying. The third class includes those that arise as a consequence of the integrated interaction of the first two classes. This class, meanings of the conjunction of the known and the unknown, includes the meanings arising in the course of voluntary exploratory behavior. These are the existential meanings intrinsic to individual experience. Consideration of all three classes provides a comprehensive, differentiated portrait of meaning free from paradox. Okay, what is he saying there?
Italics.
Yeah, so this class, the meaning of the conjunction of the known and unknown. So the third class he's saying is when you, I don't know why he's got these three classes, but fine.
I like to break things down into threes. That's like the third time he's done it.
Yes, okay. Well, then maybe he won't keep doing it since it's the third time he's done it. It's 3 of 3. The meanings of the conjunction. All right, sure. Includes the meanings of arising in the course of voluntary exploratory behavior. These are the existential meanings intrinsic to individual experience. Okay, so he's trying to give a label to subjectivity. Differentiated portrait of meaning free from paradox. Sure, I'll grant that. The known, orderly, explored, determinate world.
Wow.
Well, that's it. That's in bold. So that's a heading. And then colon. Motivation, action, perception. Map. Schemas and their hierarchies.
Lobsters.
Okay. Unfortunately, the word schema. This is the word schema is actually a really problematic word because it lies right at the heart of the two major things you have to talk about: philosophy and computers. Because in computer technology, a schema is like you're talking about basically the way in which you map symbols to their meaning. It's like what they reference, the symbol to what it symbolizes. So you have like a can't even think. An XML schema is a common use of the term schema. However, in philosophy and psychology, a schema means something different yet similar, and I keep forgetting what that meaning is. But there's two different meanings that start to get, and I don't know which one he's about to use because I'm betting he's not gonna. Yeah, he's probably about to use the psychology one, which can be confusing. So, what's the schema? In Kantian philosophy, the conception is what's common to all members of a class, a general, essential type or form. So a schema is describes a pattern of thought or behavior that organizes categories of information and the relationships among them. So in psychology, it's about relating things together. So it's similar, but there is some fairly significant differences between the two uses of the word schema, and that can be very fucking confusing because they're both similar and fairly significantly different. All right, so motivation, action, perception, schemas and their hierarchies. Map schema considered as individual units. If it is impossible to perceive the world, how do we do it? The simple answer is that we don't. We sense it well enough so that some live long enough to reproduce. We maintain our integrity momentarily while the complexity of the world swirls around us and lays us low. Induction is a scandal, famously because things change on different time frames and scales, but on every time frame and every scale eventually. Thus, no solution to the problem of perception is final. In the face of such things, Darwinian hyperproduction of potential solutions, allied with severe post-production culling, maintains life. Okay, man, I'm totally fucking on board with him here. This is, yes, you have both growth and pruning model to the way that he's trying to bring out the fact that there's a growth and pruning model to data that is absolutely fucking necessary because reality continues to change. So this is something I've talked about a zillion times. And that is what life is the solution to dealing with reality. That's why it has this Darwinian sort of process. So life forms vary in tandem with the endless transformations of the world. Enough variations exist so that a solution to each deviation from inductive predictability has so far been found. The price paid for this, however, is endless, deadly failure. Most genes do not propagate themselves across the generations. The best laid plans fail, and most species go extinct. So yes, that is absolutely true. That basically there's all this random. Actually, it's only semi-random. It's random within a certain trajectory. That's one of the things that's very important to understanding this whole subject matter, is that it is not pure random. It is random within bounds. There are probability densities that are kind of laid out beforehand, in which the randomness occurs. It occurs in kind of a limited field. Some forms and strategies, nonetheless, have proved themselves and have been conserved. These are evident at different levels of resolution, from the subcellular, where the symbiosis between mitochondria and eukaryotic cell has lasted for several 100 million years, through the individual, comprised of the uneasy union between the single-minded personalities of thirst, hunger, sexuality, and aggression, to the social, where the dominance hierarchy structure governing individual relationships has ruled for at least 100 million years. Such forms and strategies allow us to cope with the slowest changing of pattern complexities, our biological structures we presume, air, water, light, and darkness, although some of these things have been, and may again become scarce. More short-term psychological realities are also presumed: social structure, cooperation, and aggression, to name a few. Cooperation is not short-term; it is actually very long-term. It is required at the long-term scale. So I don't know why he theoretically he should understand that belongs in the long-term scale.
I don't know, 2013,
Yeah.
Possibly earlier, not necessarily.
He might not understand game theory well enough at this point.
Yeah, no, at this point, I don't think it's...
That's fine. Whatever, exactly. It's
widespread
none of us fucking... the knowledge has been progressing at a hyper-advanced rate, and so, I mean, there's so much I didn't fucking know just 10 years ago. So much. All right. It is motivation that provides the most stable of the psychological strategies. Motivation does not drive behavior deterministically, nor does it simply set goals. Instead, it provides this current state of being with boundaries and values. These remain unquestioned if current action produces its desired ends. These bounded states may be conceptualized as determinate micro-worlds of experience, as motivation and action perception schemas. Okay, so he's saying that there's an association within the area of functional value. So in other words, that's where motivation comes from. Is to try to fit within certain bounds.
Eh?
I don't understand why that's weird.
No, what do you mean fit between bounds?
In other words, there is survival at all those scales. There's survival at the short-term scale that an individual has to survive, and then there's survival at the long-term scale that a species and life itself has to continue. And those things can actually be completely in opposition to each other at certain points. That's where that's where problems with morality come up. That's where problems with a variety of things come up. That's where a moral ambiguity comes up, is the clash between scales of persistence. In other words, life has to persist versus individuals also need to persist, and sometimes those things are at odds. And I think that's what he's kind of trying to talk about, that there is a bounding of motivation. So it is motivation that provides the most stable of the psychological strategies. Motivation does not drive behavior deterministically, nor does it simply set goals. Instead, it provides the current state of being with boundaries and values. So what he's saying is that it is valuable for the group to survive. It is valuable for the species to survive. It is valuable for life itself to survive. It is valuable for me to survive. So there's all these different scales that are all that have to fit within in the same area, and so there has to be an area of action. It can't be a single plan because there's conflict between these goals that are all necessary. All of them are necessary, and there are situations in which these can have conflict, and that's why you have the boundaries and values, and that's why it doesn't set deterministic behavior. It sets, and it doesn't even set specific simple goals. It sets areas of action, acting within this area, and that's what he's talking about. And that's where he's saying these map schemas. As these bounded states may be conceptualized as determinate micro worlds of experience. So in other words, what determines you as an individual, how you associate things and all of that as your motivation, action, perception, schema.
Right.
And that's because of your experience. And your experience, I think he's also including your genetic memory as experience. At least I hope he is. As there are qualitatively different states of motivation, such as hunger, thirst, lust, or aggression, there are multiple map schemas manifesting themselves as singly and sequentially. The basic map schema consists firstly of perceptions of a point A, the undesired beginning state, and point B, the desired end state. And secondly, of motor actions designed to bring about the transformation of the former to the latter. Okay, so here he's talking about individual motivations. So now we're going back down, specifically focusing on the individual. Objects and events relevant to the current schema are perceived. Those assumed irrelevant fade into non-existence. Period. Okay, they fade into non-existence. Human beings are low capacity processors with an apprehension capacity of less than 7 objects. Our perceptions, tuned by our motivational systems, are limited by our working memory. A good goal thus requires consideration of no more things than we can track. Perhaps it is in this manner that we determine when to deconstruct a task into sub-goals. All goals are motivated. All reasonable goals are perceptually and cognitively manageable. So that's when we're breaking things down into even simpler and simpler things, we need to have it where we can deal with it in our working memory, is what he's saying. I don't actually believe that's necessarily true. I think there's we organize our data in a way that is, and I think that this is a very important thing, that the way that we organize our data also encodes something greater than those 7 objects that we can deal with. In other words, there is a trajectory of thought, a likelihood that you will think certain things because of the way that you the way you store your data, and that's why. And so the storage of data is a huge part of it, not just the momentary processing. So there is a schema behind the scenes. I think that he's talking that is not necessarily brought up yet. A given map schema arises as a consequence of insufficiency emerging along a basic motivational dimension. So I think what he's talking about is the way that we process. So there is momentary processing that's going on, and then there's storage of data. I'm talking about the storage of data. He's talking about the momentary processing. How do we categorize and collate and put things into its own little groups and stuff. So an individual basically is saying this is not good, and I need to get this other thing which is better. So that's what he's saying is, and I don't actually necessarily fully agree with that, but that thing seems like a little bit of an oversimplification, but we'll continue. This can be brought about by a decrement in the value of the present or the imagining of a better future. The emergence of a particular motivation induces a state of radical world simplification. Someone sexually deprived, for example, increasingly frustrated by the present, increasingly sees the future single-mindedly as a place of physical satiation. Oh man, he just said something about religion. That's what he just did. I don't know if you noticed that. Woo, okay. The motivational significance of beginning and end states is given by biology, or secondarily and rapidly derived from biology through learning.
Yeah, I think just 2003 is like the youngest, the newest study that he has
Participated?
cited the whole paper.
Oh, okay.
2000 and 2003 are the
Yeah,
latest.
so this was probably circa 2005-ish or at latest. All right. We confront the environment innately with loneliness, playfulness, hunger, thirst, and sexual yearning. We will work to increase wealth, however, after learning its association with pleasure, satiation, and dominance hierarchy position. Okay, let me stop for just a minute. What he's talking about is the dopaminergic brain.
Right.
This is not the serotonin brain, and
I was thinking this is like very basic. Like
yeah, he's
like
talking about a very
really
exactly. He's talking
brain.
about a simpleton's brain.
Yeah.
This is when a mind is dominated by simpleton thought.
I was just thinking that a couple paragraphs ago. I was like, man, like who are these people? Like what? Like Westerners?
Yeah, no. What he's talking about is the dopaminergic brain, the satisfaction brain. In other words, this is completely outside of the long-term drives that we have, like love, like honor, and all of these complex ideals that humans have. Those are also related to goals. They're related to long-term goals. Human beings have long-term goals. We want honor and duty and all the things that we find venerable about truthfulness and honesty and all the things that are good in mankind, that we do have a drive for. We have a drive for those things, people. And he's not talking about those like they even exist. They do exist. They fucking exist, and they're a huge portion of who the fuck we are. So he's only talking about the animalistic dopaminergic brain, and not the serotonin part of our brains that's myelinated, that has long-term, that has to do with basically making those decisions that have to do with long-term existence. And he's talked about long-term existence, and then now is not addressing it in the slightest. That is the short-term animal, that we think of as animal. Of course, all of it's animal, but the what we think of as more animalistic, short-term thinking type of brain based on dopamine. Right. Maybe he'll get to the more serotonin part of the brain, the myelinated part of the brain. Who knows? But right now, we're just talking about some simplistic shit. All right. So, how therefore might motivation be given its proper place in the study of perception? We might start with the analysis of the most basic animal strategies, building in stages from there, seeing how evolution solves the problem. Swanson describes the relationship between the simplest multicellular animal, the sponge, and the complex thing in itself. The sponge lacks a CNS, central nervous system, entirely. Instead, it is composed of sensorimotor cells arranged in an array all over its body. This array maps limited detectable environmental patterns directly onto the specialized range of motor actions with no perceptual intermediation. At this primitive level, it is not objects that evoke responses. Instead, the same cells are used for detection and output, and one pattern evokes another. The hydra, a stage above the sponge, possesses a primitive differentiated CNS with sensory, neural, and motor cells. Thus, it can detect a wider range of patterns and map them onto more actions. Neural cell intermediation provides the precursor to perception, so that the same thing can produce different outputs, but the hydra still essentially pattern matches. So in other words, there is some level of pattern matching, whereas with the sponge, it's just simple, this cell detects, and there's no integration of information, is basically what he's saying here. I don't know if he knows he's saying that, but that's what he's saying. With its increased flexibility, the hydra appears to have every advantage over the sponge, but it is handicapped in one manner: speed. Information moving across more switches means longer reaction time. This problem becomes acute as the nervous system increases in complexity. Conscious human perception can take 0.5 seconds. Sensory systems therefore retain dual branches, one to the motor system for reflex-like speed, the other to the cortex for slower elaboration of responses. Absolutely. Very important thing to understand that there is this give and take between speed of reaction and cognitive behavior. And the next time somebody is going who has one of those real fast quick quips and they can make people laugh because they can say something really fast, yeah, that's because they have the fast acting simpler mental system. And people who think longer, who aren't as quick to respond and get everybody laughing with some stupid quick little quip that is meaningless and topical, that's because they have a deeper thinking brain. So basically you can choose to be a quick thinker, or you can choose to have a more complex set of thoughts that go deeper about things. And so there is, and the thing is that is not socially favored. Having deeper thoughts does not get you up in the social hierarchy of high school. Okay, so and now we've got a society
thankfully a lot of our viewers are not in high school,
but our society has become a high school type of society where quick social wins are what's important, and we've really started, basically making sociality, your how good you are at being social to be a very hyper important, because the truth of the matter is it is what gets you resources. Being a quick quip social dominance sort of person is now becoming the dominant strategy, not a deep thinker, not a person who thinks things out, not a person who understands things, but a person who can think really quick, oversimplify, and be able to react fast and be able to say something simple that can basically get a certain social response. That is starting to become the dominant strategy, and it always becomes the dominant strategy in very hive-like civilizations when you get to a large population. That's part of the reason why I believe civilization grows and then crumbles, is because at first the dominant strategy is to be an inventor, to be a deep thinker, to be a person who understands the way that reality works. And then all you gotta do is copy those systems. Those people, those are the martyrs. Then all you gotta do is copy them. You don't have to know how it works. You don't have to know how. You can just use the tools that they have developed to get ahead, and then you can focus on quick little, fast thinking, topical strategies, and be able to have faster reaction time sorts of things like that. And basically, structure your brain around that simpler network instead of deeper networks, and therefore you can have the social wins, and those people then rise to the top quickly. And that's why you'll find that people who are managers, people who are at the top of our social hierarchy, are imbeciles, because they are very good at social stuff. All their brain exactly. They've specialized in faster networks, because there is, and all throughout nature, there's always been this, do you focus on the present and go faster and faster and faster, or do you focus on longer things that take more processing time because more information has to be integrated? And so that I believe is what destroys society, is eventually social hierarchy rises to the top again, and that's the type of mind that dominates. That's the one that gets all the resources. That's the one who becomes rich, because if you can be good at the social hierarchy shit, you're not going to become the manager. You don't have to understand what those code monkeys do. You don't have to understand anyway, and you can look down on them for they can't even come up with something really fast, and they're all stuttering and thinking things out and questioning themselves, and all of that sort of thing. So they're obviously lower on the social hierarchy, and so basically we become more chimp-like and in our linguistic skills and stuff. And those are the people who become the managers, the politicians, the liars, the people who basically they get good at lying. They can focus their brain on deception and on things that are more about breadth processing, thinking about all these little things that are much more topical and fast reaction based, instead of deeper systems that are very complex. So okay, that is something I think that's very important to talk about. So but I'm going to continue forward with the paper now. All right. Okay, so this problem becomes acute as the nervous system increases in complexity. Conscious human perception can take 0.5 seconds. Sensory systems therefore retain dual branches, one of the motor system for reflex-like speed, the other to the cortex for slower elaboration of responses. As behavior proceeds from reflexive to voluntary among complex animals, it is regulated by an increasingly complex control hierarchy. At the simplest level, somatomotor neuron pools in the spinal cord ventral horn innervate the musculature of the major limbs. At the next level, so what he's saying is just sensorimotor neuron pools are in the spinal cord.
Sensorimotor notor.
Sensorimotor notor. Sensoromotor.
Sensory motor.
Somatomotor.
Oh, what?
Motor. God damn it! Fucking bullshit.
Somatomotor.
Somatomotor.
Don't get a slightly dyslexic person to read these things.
Somatomotor neuron pools.
Wow.
In the spinal cord, ventral horn. Okay, so that's the stuff coming out of the spinal cord. Innervate, that means like go all throughout the musculature of the major limbs. At the next level, locomotor pattern generator operations are surprisingly sophisticated. So in other words, as they start to group up, so you first have more simple systems at the musculature level, although still spinally localized and reflexive. So the point is, you literally don't even have to process what he's referring to here. He's not talking about specifically. Well, he's referring to is like you put your hand on something hot. You're all the way in the spinal cord. There's already processing, recognizing that you're being damaged, and to pull your hand away. And so you're actually pulling your hand away before you even know why the fuck you're pulling your hand away, because there's literally mental-like processing happening in the spinal cord before it even gets to your brain. Okay, so animals with the brain-body connection severed at a higher level, midbrain, are still without spontaneous motor behavior. However, when intensely stimulated, they can manifest complex actions, which can be adapted to new situations. Oh, no. Without spontaneous motor behavior. Oh, okay, yes. In other words, if there's motor behavior that is spontaneous, in other words, like when you have decided to do something, instead of like applying heat or something like that. The midbrain region, there is some question I have about that, the whole reaction at the spinal cord level, because there does seem to be some mixture of the connection that I'm still questioning. Because it's like, does that mean? I mean, this is what I've been taught. I just I just regurgitated what I've been taught. However, does that mean that if you sever the spinal cord?
Yeah, there's all those weird studies of like dogs and stuff with getting their bodies cut off and still like moving around for some time.
There's still motion,
all that gruesome shit.
From what I understand, you can, if somebody is brain dead, they're not going. You can burn the fucking shit out of their hand. They're not going to pull it away. So then, where's that connection? What's if it's supposed to be happening kind of in the spinal cord? Hold on a second. Then having being brain dead, you should they should still jerk away from pain.
Maybe for a short time until the connection.
Yeah. So where I've been taught that that's happening in the spinal cord, but that doesn't completely make sense.
I know.
So I'm just gonna say that doesn't make sense to me. There's information in my head that I'm not liking. All right. Okay.
Speaking of information and breath processing and depth.
Yeah. So hold on. There's a reference here that I'm gonna read this real quick. It's fairly long at the bottom of the page here. Operations are surprisingly sophisticated, and this is 6. A spinal animal, one that is classically paralyzed as a consequence of surgical severing of the spinal cord from the brain, can still manifest coordinated limb movements of characteristic of locomotion if suspended above a moving treadmill, with its limbs in contact with the surface of the treadmill.
Weird. Also gruesome.
What? This means that the spine in isolation, is essentially capable of walking if sensory input reminiscent of locomotion is received by the spinal pattern generator. What? However, the spinal animal is not capable of any spontaneous or voluntarily controlled or even complex involuntarily controlled motor behavior. Note that what this means, at least from one viewpoint, is that the representation of the treadmill stimuli is, from the spinal perspective, move limbs in walking pattern, without any intermediation of representation independent of or abstracted from the treadmill. The spinal animal is therefore clearly not using an object. Hold on. Yeah, why is this? Okay, hold on. An object-like representation of the treadmill to initiate its locomotion behavior. Instead, the treadmill sensory pattern or array is mapped, more or less directly, onto the walking output motor pattern. So they're saying that when the brain is severed from the spinal cord, you can still suspend an animal over a treadmill and the motherfucker will walk.
Yep.
So then maybe they well then what about all these they sit there and stab your foot to see if your brain like when you're in a coma to see if your foot moves.
Do they though? Or is it just in the movies?
Is it just? I don't know, man. Something does not fit here. Something is conflicting.
Yeah, I don't know.
So there is conflicting information here, and it's pissing me off.
I agree.
Okay, so that I'm gonna have to go research later. So anyhow, so it seems. So I was taught that you move your hand away, regardless, and he's saying, and from an academic paper, that locomotion happens from the goddamn spinal cord. So that also tracks from what I've been taught from neuroscience. But then I thought that your body don't move worth a shit, period, even from pain.
If the spinal cord is severed.
If the spinal cord is severed. That's
maybe
what I understand.
Maybe the location of the severing.
Maybe that's just bad knowledge from movies being passed along. Maybe
Or it could be the location of the severing or the... Well, no, that wouldn't matter.
No,
I don't know, man.
Yeah, no, that's okay then. There's definitely some conflicting info here. All right. And I'm going with the academic over the what other information I've been given.
So far as we know, motion happens from the spinal cord.
All right. Through
various evidences.
All right. The hypothalamus basically constitutes the next stage of the hierarchy. The locomotor pattern controller. Its presence in an otherwise decerebrate animal allows for spontaneous...
That's a great word, decerebrate. Then again, I like cerebrate.
Yeah.
I like being called that.
No cerebrum. A decerebrate animal.
I like it when StarCraft calls me a cerebrate. It's kind
allows for spontaneous behavior of the fundamental survival-oriented kind, ingestive, defensive, and reproductive. Then again, yeah, I have heard that people with a severed spinal cord can still have sex. They can still get hard, still have
It's a possibility. It just says that spinal cord death could be a thing. And it could be comorbid with brain death, but not necessarily.
That does make sense. That does make sense. Okay. Yeah, especially if there's some sort of, maybe because if you have some sort of neurological disease where that's affecting all the neurons, that would also impact the spinal cord for sure.
True.
Interesting. Okay. Drinkers manifest. Okay. Spontaneous behavior of the fundamental survival-oriented kind. Got it. Hypothalamic animals are hyperactive in contrast to midbrain animals who do not eat, drink, or manifest spontaneous defensive behaviors, and to intact animals whose behavior is more specifically regulated. Interesting. So when they just have a hypothalamus, they're much more active. It is the hypothalamic medial nuclei which are particularly involved in behavior control. These nuclei may be divided into rostral segment, governing ingestion and reproduction defense, and the caudal segment, governing foraging and exploration.
Or as lovely neuroscience teacher slash counselor would call it being responsible for the 4 Fs: fighting,
Fucking.
fleeing,
Oh.
food, and fucking.
Okay. Fighting, fleeing, food, and fucking.
I guess feeding.
Okay. So rostral and caudal segments.
Yeah, so we have reproduction and defense, and foraging and exploration. So
Rostral and caudal is just front and back, right?
I think so, but don't quote me on it. Rostral is
All right.
definitely back, but caudal I'm not entirely certain.
Yeah. Okay. The rostral segment sets particular goals: food, a mate, escape from predation. The caudal segment, by contrast, controls the initial analysis of the unexpected and unexplored.
So there it is: motivation and perception.
Yeah.
And the hypothalamus.
It includes the mammillary body, controlling
Boobies. Wait, no.
no,
No.
controlling head direction and ventral tegmental area. Origin of dopaminergic
wait.
incentive reward circuitry.
Wait.
But
How do we know the VTA? The ventral tegmental area.
it's part of the hypothalamus.
Okay, hold on. So it's not from.
So the thalamus and hypothalamus are right next to each other, and the important part of the brain that we think of as like of human import and not just animal.
Oh, okay, that's why the VTA is integral to the dopamine reward.
Yeah, the reward system. Yeah,
it's the reward
absolutely.
system, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's next to the black substance.
Yes. Substantia nigra.
Yeah.
Okay, the caudal segment, by contrast, controls the initial analysis of the unexpected and explored. It includes the mammillary body, controlling head direction, the ventral tegmental area, origin of dopaminergic incentive, reward circuitry, and locomotive behavior. Locomotor. God, why is that hard for me to say? And the reticular part of the substantia nigra, regulating the orienting movements of the eyes, head, neck, and upper limbs. The hypothalamus thus functions as follows. The rostral segment generates a map schema oriented towards some basic end. The implementing appropriate perceptions and actions. If the schema succeeds, another based on different primary motivation rapidly supersedes it. Woo. Okay. Man, that was all throughout that sentence. I was needing to sneeze, and it was killing me. Okay, the map schema. So he's saying I forgot what map stood for.
Motivation.
Action, perception. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oriented towards some basic end, implementing appropriate perceptions and actions. If the schema succeeds, another based on a different primary motivation rapidly supersedes it. If it fails, however, the caudal segment switches to exploratory mode and gathers more information. Thus, at the psychological level of analysis, 1. The external world is mapped onto motor output before it is perceived. 2. Such mapping transforms itself into object perception as the CNS develops in complexity. 3. A tight connection remains between sensation and action even when perceptual intermediation arises. Remains between sensation and action. Okay. And 4, most importantly, that the schema within which an object is perceived is controlled by hypothalamically grounded, goal-directed motivation.
So we're analyzing essentially how
Very basic animals.
how they
work.
initiate action.
Yes.
So if we're to create an AI, a robot, how would they? We're essentially this is the part that's interesting to me anyway, is that we're basically putting into words, therefore quantifying for some of us for the first time, what it is like what happens when you think or move or want or
Right.
what the fuck goes on at a a mechanical
What goes on?
step by step
Right.
level. It's essentially what we're discussing here, which is why it may feel a little eerie at times. It's like to see yourself or to see your motivations or whatever from that perspective, but that's essentially where we're breaking down the basics, the basic building blocks of these activities that underlie, well, that these events that underlie daily activities that go from mundane to profound in our experience.
Right.
But at
and
its
right now we're
base
talking
is,
about
you know,
the very mundane, the very first parts of how we perceive and interact with the world, which are very necessary for developing an AI.
but also at the base of every great operetta or fucking opus on
You still have to perceive
transcendence. You still have to do these things. You have to, like, that's still, which to me is like a mind fuck, but could be like humbling also, where to to see all the grandness and grandiosity and the potential and the magic that happens out of humans on a level of like, well, here's a little meat robot that has to perceive and then move and then react with a schema, and you know, it's just like really, really neat stuff. So.
Well, here's the thing. I think maybe he's hinting at something he's going to get to later, and that is, remember, he talked about color being more abstract. The visual perception versus
this might have
physical.
To be a two-parter, actually, because it's a long arc.
It is. The physical perception. So right now, all we're talking about is physical perception and reaction, not necessarily visual perception. Now, how the information is fed from the visual cortex into these areas, he's not started to.
Oh, I mean, you can
yet.
infinitely regress into like detailing.
That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that there is he may be talking about he may talk about how the physical, because at the very beginning, remember, he talked about how the physical object, we grasp them in our hands, and and that is very real feeling, and because of it being physical, whereas things like color are not as real feeling. He may be about to talk about that here we have all of these nerves, how we react to them, and that all has to do with physical perception of physical things, completely physicality, and not necessarily visual senses and scent and sound and things like that. I think he's about to get into how those interact with this system.
What if he doesn't?
He should. If he doesn't, he should have. But then again, you have only so much space you can put in a paper. But
yeah. So let's.
But so far, I mean, it's been I have been very happy with this paper. It's really good.
Let's dear those 4 things down real quick.
Okay. All right, the 4 things. What is he talking about? What are you talking about?
The psychological level of analysis, like all.
Okay, the external world is mapped onto motor input before it is perceived. So that is there. Because of the way that our spinal cord is arranged, it already has a map of things like walking and and
apparently
right. So that's already encoded.
As long as if it's reminiscent of something it used to do, it can do it.
Right. That is encoded into the neurons. In the
on the basic like calcium channel level, just like
it's the way that the neurons are arranged, or the way the nerves are arranged, is what we'll call them. So that's what he's saying is like that's the cycle. The external world is mapped onto motor output before it is perceived. So motor output is first. Such mapping transforms itself into object perception as the CNS develops in complexity. So in other words, the more complex parts of the brain, the central nervous system, you end up that those maps of the world end up becoming parts of our consideration. In other words, like things like walking and stuff like that actually interact with other parts of our brain, and we actually can decide not to walk when we get the walking perception. We get there's all these various things that come through already. They're already kind of prepackaged. So in terms of programming, it's kind of like object-oriented programming. You have objects that are already, they do all these things, and you just get information from the object. It's abstracted away from other parts of your processing, and so it just kind of sends. You're getting this signal now. You're getting the walking signal now, and so that's kind of what he's trying to point out here, I think. CNS develops a tight. So number 3, a tight connection remains between sensation and action, even when perceptual intermediation arises. So what he's saying is that once you perceive, so in other words, that walking, subset that's, come up through your nervous system into your brain, and you're getting that signal. there's still a tight connection between the sensation and the action, even when you're getting even when your brain is allowed to intermediate and say, no, don't do that, or try or do something else. Do something slightly different. Let's add some complexity to that walking locomotion thing. Let's locomote in a different way. And most importantly, number 4, that the schema within which an object is perceived, so in other words, an object being the treadmill, being whatever thing that we think of that we've put borders around, is controlled by hypothalamically grounded goal-directed motivation. So in other words, the way that we have perceived an object is based upon our physical interaction with it. In other words, we've decided what he's trying to point out here, the whole point of the paper from the beginning, the context he's trying to keep you in, is that meaning is dependent upon usefulness. Usefulness here, of course, is dependent upon your physical interaction with it right now in this context. The physical interaction with a treadmill makes it an object that is meaningful to you, that is separate from the rest of the room, because it is meaningful in that it has an impact on you.
Such a basic definition of meaning, then.
It is.
But he just said 3 forms of meaning, so I mean.
Yeah, so
that's
hopefully, we're not even halfway through this paper, so no.
I know, we got 18 pages.
This is a fucking neuroscience class in one paper.
That's
He's basically this.
And no it's a bunch of chapters in a book that is probably part of a neuroscience class.
Yeah, this is probably a he's probably got this in a neuroscience book. Okay, because that's what this is.
Psychology of meaning.
It is a very important.
It's like a psychology book, not a neuroscience book, I guess.
Well, psychology is part of neuroscience.
Yeah.
A good neuroscience class has to have psychology as part of it. You have to understand, more than just
Cognition.
The neurons, right? You have to understand what is. What's going on with the data. There has to be some understanding of the flow of data going on. To identify some end as valuable means to grant it consummatory reward status formally as an end, as end implies consummation. Okay, so consummatory reward has well-defined, relevant, and oft instinctive features. So in other words, so there is some sort of, so an object is related to some sort of ends. In other words, there's some sort of goal-directed behavior that has to do with our categorization of things as objects. The human capacity for abstraction means, however, that the hypothetical, arbitrary, or symbolic may also come to function as consummatory reward. Hold on just a second, because I was thinking about something while saying that, while reading that out loud too. So there's an important thing that I was actually thinking about just fucking last night in bed before going to sleep. That a lot of times people don't understand how desire itself is a huge part of human experience. Like it is important. One of the things that we value as humans and being a human is our ability to take our base desires and put them off.
Right.
And then that leads to some
so some would say a categorical difference between human and animals, and
right,
being able to do that.
Exactly, to put off our instant gratification. So in other words, to put away desire,
or and even moderate gratification.
And there's Buddhist type of religion and things like that where desire itself is like the author of suffering. And so they're trying to what is the attachment is suffering is more direct, but a lot of times there's kind of this idea that any kind of desire itself is in itself sort of a bad thing, and you can kind of think of that because all of your bad behaviors do end up seeming to go along with desire, and there are certain people who become overcome with desire that is what we most often view as criminality, people who cannot control their desire. So we kind of have this bad association with desire. However, what we're getting at right here, right now, is that without desire, you're not even a human. Right. You don't have any reason to do anything. You're not. Without reason to do things, without goals, without desires, you're dead. You're literally just like a dead set of data without there's no, in other words, there's never a reason to do anything if there's not a reason to do something.
Right.
And so, like, for instance, when you're designing a computer program, it'll just sit there in a loop doing nothing until it receives input, because it has no, unless you're telling it, unless you already have it pre-programmed to go do stuff, you know. So that's kind of like a desire. But there, you know, there's just, desire lies at the heart of existing as a human consciousness. You can't really exist without it.
Yeah.
You don't have a need to think. You don't have a need to consider information. You don't have, if there's not some sort of goal, some sort of drive, some sort of reason to do those things. So therefore, so desire is not something that is bad. It is just something that has dual aspects. And so a lot of times, because it is something that can overcome people so much, we think of it in a negative fashion. However, there is an extreme amount of positivity that needs to be understood about desire as something that is valuable. And so that's kind of what he's getting to here, is that at the base level, there is this, you know, goal-oriented motivation that we see as very base and and we kind of tend to look down on, as, you know, culturally, as, you know, from religion and from, you know, a variety of ways of trying to make ourselves better. But at the same time, it is something that is, when you suppress desire, you can suppress desire so much that you become a depressive individual. This is something this is my own personal observation, that people who have completely lost desire, that's a part of depression a lot of times. When they don't have any desire for then you don't have motivation. When you don't have desire, we don't have any view of the future, what's that kind of conservative value that is you got no ambition. You got no ambition, son. That actually has a value to it, and that is that there is that is based in desire, and that is how it can go wrong. I mean, you know, when people become overcome with desire, overcome with ambition, they become a monster.
Right.
But it is and there is a balance to it. You have to have it, or you're not. You know, you're not even a person. And so there are people who become depressed because of a lack of desire, a lack of when nothing becomes satisfying, when nothing becomes valuable, when there is no thing that is better than anything else, when there's no selection of one thing being better than anything else, which actually is kind of a very, once you become extremely feminized, you become lost in analysis paralysis, because no thing is any better than any other thing, and so therefore you end up having a lack of desire. That lack of desire, that lack of a dopaminergic, you know, brain, ends up, you know, kind of creating a depressive creature that can't really survive. And so that is it's an interesting part of this whole picture that he's sort of, I don't know that he's meaning to get at this, but I think it's kind of important from my perspective anyway.
Let's finish up this last paragraph and then wrap it up for this stream.
Okay.
And we'll put the rest into next Monday. We might finish it. Might have to be a 3-parter. This is a beast of a paper.
It really is.
But
I'm loving it though. Now it's
good.
like, at first I was like, what's this motherfucker gonna say? I'm like, oh, okay, god damn it, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Once I saw where it was from and what was said in it and how you reacted to the introductory paragraph, I was like, all right, this is gonna be good.
Yeah. I mean, he's still focusing on the.
Oh, I think we're gonna have to. In fact, I might want to make it a 3-parter, because the last part, I think we're gonna have to talk some shit.
Yeah, we might, because right now we're still only at animal. We're still only at dopaminergic.
Exactly.
We're only at the dopamine brain.
Stuff.
Only at the short-term thinking brain.
We're on the first of 3 forms of meaning.
Right. Yeah. So I think he might get to it though. I'm given how much and how well he knows what he's talking about here.
So
I'm feeling optimistic. I'm feeling very optimistic about how good this is going to be.
We'll see.
So
all right, last paragraph.
All right, let's do it. Consummatory reward has well-defined, relevant, and oft instinctive features. The human capacity for abstraction means, however, that the hypothetical, arbitrary, or symbolic may also come to function as consummatory reward. May serve as a goal may serve as goal or indicate satiety. So satiation, like satisfaction, so that current behaviors can be terminated, may come to frame the perception of objects evaluated as incentives, threats, and punishments. Period. Okay, hold on. Capacity for a means reward means, however, that hypothetical, arbitrary, or symbolic may also come to function as consummatory reward. Okay,
Right.
so in other words, our symbols, I think what he's trying to say here is symbols can become can become their own kind of objects in that they're they can drive satisfaction.
Yeah, that the reward can be arbitrary.
Right. So the current behaviors can be terminated. Okay, so I guess that it can be in conflict with other behaviors, so that it's more satisfying to terminate this behavior than it is to continue with the behavior. So you can actually drive satisfaction with by not doing a behavior, I think is what he's talking about. So that is because of the satisfaction, the satiety of some sort of symbolic thing, you still have reward. May come to frame the perception of objects evaluated as incentives, threats, and punishments. Okay, so incentives, threats, and punishments are kind of like objects, I think is what he's saying.
Right.
So it's like, we talked about objects before, and now threats.
And all the parameters that objects have.
Right, which were more physical. And now he's saying, but now with a more complex brain, you can have these abstractions that are all sort of in this same sort of category as the other objects, which,
Right.
have to do with goal-oriented, behavior. That these incentives, threats, and punishments are also now kind of in that same category as objects were for a lesser brain.
Right.
So he didn't say that very well, I don't think, but I think that's what he means. Such consequences of goal setting are universal, regardless of the specifics of the goal. This means, one, that the cortex modulates archaic motivational systems by substituting abstractions for primordial goals. Cortex modulates archaic motivational systems by substituting abstractions for primordial goals.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Two, that goals might be considered generally as a class, so that the diversity of potential goals can be ignored, and the goal itself serves as an object of discussion.
Sure. Like, it doesn't matter why you want to do the thing. It's just you have a reason.
We establish point B, the ideal endpoint of our linear activity. We specify and evaluate our starting point A and our actions in reference to that ideal. Okay, so he's going back to the dissatisfaction at A leads to satisfaction at B. He's still once again going on that whole dopamine.
Basic map schema. Yeah.
Right.
We specify and evaluate, or we strive to transform A into B,
testing possible solutions to the now bounded frame problem. We become anxiety-ridden or frustrated as a consequence of our failures, manifold and common. Alternatively, we embody a solution as a consequence of favorable mutation or stumble across an answer, communicate our successes, and move up the dominance hierarchy. What does he mean there? Is he talking about social dominance? What is he?
Yeah. The whole point of your motivation.
Because he hasn't talked about social dominance up until this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's what the whole paragraph about consummatory reward.
No, consummatory reward is just about consuming things. It is about.
Yeah, but he said for human capacity for abstraction means that
Functions kind of okay. Well, I mean, I guess our first the first development of our large brain is related to social. It is not related to tool use. So
Right.
maybe because he knows that, he's not really telling anybody here and just assuming the reader already knows that. Maybe that's what's going on. Okay, our map schema solutions are inevitably evolutionary, phylogenetically, as our successful genes accumulate, and ontogenetically, as we try many useless approaches and conserve those that work. Oh, wait, that's the end of the sentence?
Yeah, map schema solutions are inevitably evolutionary, phylogenetically, and ontogenetically something.
Yeah, that's just a bad sentence. See, determined. If you added the word determined at the end, I think that would work.
Right. And that's it.
Yeah.
Because then we'll talk more about maps and other things.
Let's read number, let's see, 7 here. Is that part of... let's read this little thing that's on the page because I think they're kind of important. The footnotes, yeah. 7. The hypothalamus has developed subsystems providing integrated control of all 3 subsections of the motor system. So, somatomotor, governing the operation of skeletal, voluntary muscle, autonomic, innervating smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands, and neuroendocrine, exerting its effects through the pituitary. The hypothalamus also regulates temperature and the sleep-wake cycle.
Actually, I think it was the thalamus that was responsible for the 4 Fs, if I recall correctly. But
no, thalamocortical loops are. I think the thalamus really has a lot more. Has more to do with cortical processes. It's right. It's the what's the little. The one part of the brain that every hippie knows about. What's it called?
Pituitary.
No. The pine cone. Like, why can't I think of the name?
The pituitary gland?
No.
Oh, sorry, pineal.
Pineal. Yes, the pineal is
the other gland.
Right. Right between the thalamus and the hypothalamus.
Neat.
And basically the hypothalamus is governs the lower brain cycles, and the thalamus more the upper higher brain cycles. So it's really interesting that it's right there in the center between the two. But
The center.
it gets my hippie, my inner hippie going. Anyhow, so yeah, good. So far, loving this paper. Definitely looking forward to reading through it some more. This is a fun exercise.
Yeah. And I'm gonna have to find a paper we hate, which also may be this paper.
Also may be this paper, because so far he's only talking about. But I think, like I said, I think he's just covering one thing at a time. You can only cover. I mean, when you're getting into this level of detail, you have to talk about one thing and stay to that one thing. I mean, that's kind of the context of the paper, that you can only focus on so much at once.
Very true.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna see if we can finish it up in full next time. But yeah, come see us next Monday. And in the meantime, if you guys feel like joining Patreon, that is a good time. And we will be doing an after show after we've discussed this entire paper. So next time or time after that. But in the meantime, of course, we will be recording the after show discussion as well. So it is kind of a special bonus material that you guys get as well, and you get to participate in it at the same time. So it's double the bonus.
So this is a new format we've spontaneously developed: the dramatic reading of academic papers. Yep. I like it. I like this.
And yeah, we'll see you all soon. In the meantime, join Discord. Those of you who are patrons will get access to special rooms where I post exclusive articles, and we can chat about things. But yeah, thank you again, everybody, for joining us and listening, and we will see you all next Monday, and I'll see you patrons in Discord. Okay, bye. Thank you.